Hi everyone, welcome to the first in our four-part webinar series on securing assets, a 360-degree outlook. This episode will focus on the lessons learned between 2009 and 2019. Now before we start, if you could please scan the QR code on the left-hand side. That takes you to a page by Hypersay and into the meeting room with the code BAPHY. This allows some audience interactivity during the presentation. I'm Suren Ravindra, the Chief Product Officer at Threshold. I have with me Frank Wiener, the Chief Marketing Officer at Sepior, and Roberto Machado, the Chief Product Officer at Cybavo. The estimated value of digital assets lost since 2009 stands at a whopping $11 billion. I'm going to start and hand it over to Frank from Sepior to discuss a little bit about the crypto hacks related to key security. Over to you, Frank.
Thanks, Suren, and thanks everyone for joining us. As you may know, Sepior is all about key security. We've developed a technique called multi-party computation to provide the security of the private keys used for signing transactions and other purposes. Today, I want to talk to you about crypto hacks related to key security. And as we all know, anyone who has access to the keys can create a digital signature, which allows them to transfer funds from the wallet. So basically, keeping the keys secure is paramount to maintaining security of the digital assets. Historically, we've had two primary approaches to generate approvals to transfer assets. One is a single signature, single party scheme. The other is a multi-party scheme recording multiple signatures as part of the transaction record. Now, if we look at the historical thefts, a vast majority of them go back to the failures around single approver schemes. And to start with, we'll take a look at Mt. Gox back in 2011. In 2011, Mt. Gox had a hot wallet model where all of their clients' wallets had their own private keys that were centrally stored. And early in the year, around February or so, about 2,000 Bitcoin were stolen from these client accounts. The way this happened is hackers gained access to a computer of an auditor, and then they hacked into the admin accounts. From there, they set up and created a bunch of fake sales, which saturated the market in terms of they generated more assets for sale than there were buyers. Through that process, they drove the value of the Bitcoin transactions down from $17.50 a share to about a penny a share. At that point, they turned around and actually took the assets from the clients that were under management by Mt. Gox and issued sale orders for the assets that were held by those clients. And they, of course, purchased the assets at this artificially low price and then transferred them out. So the big problem here was obviously on multiple dimensions. First was the fact that they had a single approver, single signature scheme, which allowed one party to approve these transactions. Another obvious one is the fact that they had all of the keys centrally stored to where hackers could gain access to one storage area and have access to all the keys. As we'll hear later, there's a much broader set of issues that happened at Mt. Gox. But these were some of the fundamental things that led to this initial breach back in 2011. Now, at that time, what Mt. Gox chose to do was to shift their model. They moved away from the hot wallet holding all the coins to using a cold wallet to hold the majority of the coins. And this was assumed and sold as a scheme to make sure that that same hack and that same threat didn't happen again. Unfortunately, in 2011, multi-sig or any other multi-party approval scheme didn't exist at that time. So still all of these assets were secured using a single approver scheme. And what happened is over the course of multiple years, the assets that were in cold storage were bled down in basically draining all the assets from the account. Now, it's not 100% clear. There's some speculation on exactly how this occurred. One theory is the idea that the hackers set up basically a leaky hot wallet where small amounts of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies were withdrawn from these hot wallets over time. And as the wallets would get down to below a certain threshold, cold storage would automatically refresh the wallet with more Bitcoins so that there was enough in the hot wallet to continue day-to-day operations. But ultimately, these small amounts were skimmed, and through the course of 2011 to 2014, roughly 850,000 Bitcoin were lost. And they basically drained all the Bitcoin that were held in the Mt. Gox account. Now, it turns out about 200,000 coins were later found in a cold storage wallet by the CEO. So in net, 650,000 coins were lost. At that point, it was valued at around 460 million. By today's terms, it's on the order of $9 billion, $8 or $9 billion. So obviously, it was just a massive loss. But again, if we dig into it and look at what was the fundamental problem, we'll find there were multiple factors that led up to it. But ultimately, it led to the failure where a single signature was able to complete these transactions and allow these assets to be lost. So clearly, the single signature approach wasn't sufficient, or single approver approach wasn't sufficient. And it's not just about keys being stolen and misused. There's also the risk of a single key being lost. And Quadriga CX is a perfect example of that. And we'll hear more about this in later discussions. But basically, Quadriga CX was a very popular Canadian exchange, did about 1.2 billion in trades back in 2017. In 2018, in the December timeframe, the CEO was traveling in India, became ill, and presumably died. And that was unfortunate, but what was also unfortunate was he was the only person who had the passwords or the private keys to roughly $130 million worth of assets in cold storage. And they again had this single approver, single signature scheme that meant that if he was not available, nobody had availability to the assets. Now, there's a lot of suspicious circumstances that surround this whole case, and I won't go into it at this point in time. But the long story short is they were never able to break into the cold storage. So we don't know if assets are there or if they were actually all drained and stolen, similar to what happened at Mt. Gox. But it's the same fundamental challenge where we had a single approver in control of the key and the assets, and that's just woefully insufficient. But what we found is multi-sig and multi-party approval schemes in general improve and minimize some of these failure scenarios, but multi-sig alone is not without its vulnerabilities. And back in 2019, we did see a major hack of a multi-sig, multi-party approval scheme. Now, again, the idea with multi-sig is that we don't have a single approver, we have multiple approvers. But the way it works is multi-sig records multiple signatures on the transaction record as part of releasing the digital assets for transfer. Now, Bitcoin was modified to natively support the recording of multiple approver transactions or multiple signatures on the transaction record. But many other digital assets and ledgers don't support that recording of multiple signatures. And so they rely on the introduction of a smart contract or similar modification of code to provide that functionality. Ethereum is one big example. Now, Parity is an example of a company that provides smart contracts, and they're a great company. They've got a lot of smart contracts that provide a wide variety of services, one of which is this recording of multiple approvers on the multi-sig transaction. Unfortunately, they modified the original Ethereum or the original multi-sig code that they had to achieve greater efficiency and use less gas as part of the transaction processing. When they did that, they inadvertently introduced a vulnerability, and that vulnerability was not detected even though they went through code reviews. So as they rolled this into production, suddenly all of the wallets using the smart contract approach became vulnerable. And it wasn't long before hackers discovered it and began draining wallets. Now, fortunately, a number of white hats stepped in and shut down the potential for a large number of wallets to be hacked, but ultimately $30 million was stolen before it was resolved. So these are just a couple of examples of where single approver schemes are woefully insufficient. And multi-party approver schemes can also be insufficient if they introduce additional vulnerabilities. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Suren. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Next, we'll be hearing from Roberto Machado, the Chief Product Officer for Cybavo. We'll talk a little bit about the losses due to infrastructure security. Roberto, over to you.
Thank you, Suren. Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here today with our partners of Sepior and Threshold. So I'm Roberto Machado. I'm product director at Cybavo. I'm going to introduce a bit our background. Basically, we are a team of cybersecurity experts who have been developing a cryptocurrency wallet for enterprise, which is secure and is user-friendly and usable for daily business operations. Our expertise comes from sister security consulting for cryptocurrency exchanges. And we have developed this wallet for enterprise, which tries to somehow unify the previous compromise between security and liquidity for enterprise solutions. So today we are going to review some of the, let's say, most common or most popular hacks. And basically the goal is to try to express how security for enterprise wallet protection should be taken care from a 360 degrees. We should take care of not only about the key security, but we should go beyond that and we should consider some other elements that are essential for the security of the enterprise wallet. So from inside of solution, we are leveraging Sepior's MPC technology for the private key security, for the private key protection. But we have developed our solution taking into account some other different let's say aspects and point of view. So our solution is based on these elements of security, and I'm going to introduce some of them. So for example, blockchain security is essential, is common to all of the solutions there. So about the distributed ledger, cryptographic for immutable records and so on. But we also need to take care of system security. All the wallets run on a system, on a software, or in some hardware. So how systems need to, so when we design an enterprise wallet, we need to take care of that system security from the very basic level. Then authentication security is also essential, since when we are, users are going to be operating this wallet, so we need to make sure that a user who is operating a wallet is who claims to be, and no one is impersonating in a malicious attempt of attack. Then node security is also a very important part of the wallet protection. Blockchain nodes are let's say the most exposed part, since these are the part which is directly connected to the internet, and there are different vulnerabilities that could be exploited through the blockchain node. So this is something very important also. And then finally, wallet security needs to be considered as well, since wallet is implementing, let's say, the all business logic for the wallet. So that includes policies and balances and user roles and responsibility. So wallet security needs to be very taken into account as well. So these are some of the major theft losses cases that happened in 2019. Some of them are crypto thefts. Some of them are, as Frank was introducing earlier, like problems with the private key being assigned only for a single person. So here we can see that some of them are really huge thefts. In some cases, like Binance, like a huge cryptocurrency exchange, and for example, Upbit, they were stolen up to $50 million on a single attack. So these attacks basically, they have different nature. Some of them are basically being exploited. Basically, the wallet software was exploited. In some other cases, the private key was directly stolen. In some cases, the wallet key creation process somehow was hacked. In some other cases, they were basically exposed to insider attacks or social engineering. So today we are going to take a look at some of these specific cases, and we're going to see how imaginative hackers and attackers can get when they are trying to steal funds from an enterprise wallet. So the first example I'm going to introduce is a BitPay wallet attack. This attack basically is due to basically caused by a backhaul introduced by attackers on a very common software library. So these attackers, basically, this happened in 2018. A group of hackers, what they did is they got access to a master branch in a very popular JavaScript library in a library called event stream. So basically, they introduced a bug hole in the main branch, the master branch of this library, and they uploaded. So this main branch, this version with the bug hole, was available for the public usage during 3 months before before launching the attack. And then eventually, a wallet provider, BitPay in this case, used this library. So basically, this library basically helps when wallet or when JavaScript is processing data streams. So in the case of BitPay wallet, the data stream was including the private key. So the attackers were able to directly access the data stream, including the private key, and steal the private key from there. So this is a very clear example of how third-party libraries should be somehow secure and monitored very closely. So JavaScript is a very common library, but there are other cases, for example, which imply a high risk, like, for example, camera functions used very commonly in wallets for QR scanning, for instance, or some input functions such as keyboard usually also utilize third-party libraries. So this is a very, let's say, vulnerable, a very common attack vector for cryptocurrency wallets. Second example is called Ethereum Black Valentine's Day. So in this case, the vulnerability, the exploitation was targeting basically the wallet code within the Ethereum blockchain node. Attackers were able to seize 46,000 Ethereum at different, let's say, attacks. So what happened in this attack is basically a previous version of the Ethereum blockchain node included some wallet code within the node code. And this wallet code was working the following way. The user operating the node could trigger a method called unlock account. After introducing the password, if you unlock account at that version, you could send transactions concurrently, different transactions, without having to introduce the password again for each one of these transactions until a lock account method was called. The hackers knew this vulnerability in the node code. They knew the ports that were being used for calling the method. So basically what they did is they launched a massive attack on all the nodes on the Ethereum network, and basically all the nodes who were in the unlock account state, for those nodes, the attackers were able to send transactions to their own wallet to steal the Ethereum and different tokens. So it is suspected that more than 20,000 machines were vulnerable to that attack. So in that case, we see how this very exposed element in the wallet, which is the blockchain node, can be leveraged also as a vector attack for stealing private keys or cryptocurrency funds. Then there is a third factor, which usually is less spoken of, is the human factor. When we discuss about crypto security, we talk about how secure a solution can go if we are talking about cold storage or this type of encryption. But sometimes we forget about that there is always a human, or there is usually a human behind the operation of the wallets. And there is we have a philosophy in Cybavo. We think that if it's not user friendly, it's not secure, because humans, in the end, they will find a way to make a non-user friendly process user friendly. There is this VeChain hack, which is the perfect example of that. VeChain was last year, the VeChain Foundation, they suffered an attack that where an attacker was able to seize $6.5 million US, 1 billion VeChain tokens. So basically, whenever there was a human process, there was an automated process, a manual process behind the wallet creation. There were a series of standards within the foundation, a very strict standards of how a wallet should be created. But there was always a person behind following that standard. What happened is this standard was very time consuming. It had a lot of steps. And eventually one of the operators creating the wallet decided to bypass some of those steps. So they were hackers. Some hackers were aware of the process, and they were able to detect that there was this misconduct, there was this human error in the wallet creation. They were able to steal the private keys from that wallet who did not fulfill the full requirements of security defined by VeChain. So this is basically summarizing very well this maximum, right? That if it's not user friendly, the user is going to make it friendly for sure. So in a nutshell, basically we are thinking that key security is essential for wallet security. Of course, if the key of the transaction, let's say power, is stolen or is achieved by an attacker, the funds are directly stolen. But we should also keep in mind that security needs to be built beyond the private key. We need to integrate a 360 vision when we are trying to protect the cryptocurrency funds, and this is especially important in enterprise wallets. And finally, difficult to use means potential risk due to the human factor behind. So that's everything from my end. Back to you, Suren.
Thanks, Roberto. I'll be talking about the losses in the ecosystem due to poor controls and poor risk mitigation. The first example we'll look at is an exchange called MintPow. Now, in July 2014, MintPow lost $2 million in assets due to a hot wallet hack. In October of the same year, MintPow was sold to a company called Moolah. Moolah was run by its CEO, Alex Green, also known as Ryan Kennedy. Now, in October 2014, very soon after being acquired by Moolah, the CEO disappeared and 3,894 Bitcoin in funds was lost. Now, in this example, the lack of segregation of duties and the lack of asset controls, along with the hot wallet access, gave the CEO easy control and access over all the funds. Now, from this, what can we learn? Well, a business should never, ever have one individual manage its assets. And users' assets should be separated from company assets. The ideal scenario would be to separate users' funds in individual addresses for the purposes of good record keeping and reconciliations. I'd like to now discuss an example of the exchange BTCE. Now, BTCE was an exchange which started in 2011. And in July 2017, the supposed man behind it all, Alexander Vinnik, was arrested while in Greece. Over the 6 years, BTCE became very well known for money laundering, and it was said to have laundered up to $4 billion in assets, with 95% of ransomware funds being liquidated through this exchange. BTCE also used Bitcoin mixers to conceal activity. Alexander was fined $12 million, with the company being fined $110 million by regulators. Now, the biggest issue here with this exchange is that it required no user KYC, which means a lot of the activity that it attracted was illicit activity from bad actors in the space. Also, there were no external audit or compliance controls in place. In terms of lessons, well, a business managing any type of asset, crypto or fiat, should always follow best practices. This means implementing internal and external audit checks and compliance checks. It can also be a good idea to have proof of reserves monthly checks, especially for exchanges, and along with complete and verifiable records. And following best practices means good, strong KYC and thorough AML procedures in place. It's said that 300,000 Bitcoin from the Mt. Gox hack was laundered through BTCE. And it was laundered specifically through 3 wallets which only had admin control access. There are also funds from other exchange hacks which have been found to be laundered through this exchange. And all of these best practice elements would have helped prevent that. Now, the last example I'd like to bring to you is Quadriga CX. Frank spoke of Quadriga CX and its issues from the perspective of the private key, and we'll cover it from a slightly different angle. So as you may remember, Gerard Cotton, the CEO who had sole control of the assets, died in December 2018, leaving behind a loss of $190 million in assets. However, the interesting thing with this example is that Ernst & Young did a post-event report, and it actually found that Cotton, the CEO, had withdrawn between 2016 and 2018 9,500 Bitcoin, 380,000 Ethereum, and 240,000 Litecoin in order to trade on exchanges for himself. He'd also created multiple fake Quadriga accounts and credited them with fake values. The CEO had used customer funds to trade for himself and to fund his lifestyle, all of which was fraudulent. Now, the issues here are very clear. Again, a lack of segregation of duties and controls around who could access these assets, and a very clear lack of no separation of company assets and exchange user assets. Similar to MinPower, a business should never have one individual managing its assets. And company assets and user funds should always be separated. However, in this example, had there been regular audit checks and proof of reserves checks in place prior to his sudden death in 2018, it would have caught a lot of the illicit activity going on with this particular exchange. There was also no documentation, and poor record keeping often hides a myriad of issues. I'd like to introduce to you Threshold. Threshold is an enterprise management treasury system for digital assets. Now, what is it? Well, it's a collaboration between Nabu, Sepior, and Cybavo. And it allows us to deliver the latest in next-gen technology for companies of all sizes. We enable our clients to focus on their business growth without having to worry about security or inefficiencies. It's keyless. There are no private keys required to manage assets with Threshold. It enables enhanced, bespoke layers of protection and control, which you as the user would use. It's highly resilient and more available. And its beautiful UX is friction-free, allowing and enabling a pain-free management experience for the digital asset world. It's also very cost efficient. There's no deployment cost, and it actually allows lower operational fees. Now, this particular episode is the first in a 4-part webinar series, and we'll be covering the makings of Threshold in the upcoming 3 parts. So on the 18th of June, there'll be a keynote from Sepior discussing keyless wallets and how removing the risk of private key theft is achieved using Threshold cryptography. On the 2nd of July, Cybavo will be discussing security beyond managing the private key. And on the 16th of July, we at Threshold will be discussing distributed trust, removing single points of failure. If you'd like any more information on Threshold, please head to our website at threshold.com, and our Twitter handle is @thresholduk. If you'd like to contact us directly, please email sales@threshold.com. See you next time. Thank you.